Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And welcome to the second Divio Coffee in the Cloud webinar, where today I will be talking with Jonathan Stoppani, our Divio CTO and all-round general expert on what he thinks about the state of the cloud in 2022.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
A warm welcome to everybody from my hand as well. And I'm excited to be here. Let's see if in 2022 my prediction will actually hold.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see. So, okay, let's kick off with the first question here. And 2021 saw the adoption of public cloud accelerate. Enterprise-level organizations embraced hybrid and multi-cloud solutions. And as far back as 2018, the RightScale State of the Cloud survey indicated that 81% of enterprises had a multi-cloud strategy, either laid out or in the works. Do you see this acceleration continuing into 2022 and beyond, or are we likely to see a slowdown in the adoption rate for any reason?
Yeah, I think the hard part will be to come up with any reasons for it to slow down. And right now, I don't see any. So my guess is that it will continue to accelerate. There are different reasons for that. For example, you mentioned the multi-cloud strategy, and more and more companies are actually seeing that as a way to reduce risks when going to the cloud. So yes, it will definitely accelerate. The question is, what are the reasons, or how will the strategy change in that regard? I think on the topic of multi-cloud, a lot will probably change. And the main thing that I think is not clear to lots of companies right now is what multi-cloud means or what the advantages will be, because there are a couple of different patterns of how you can adopt a multi-cloud strategy or what the multi-cloud strategy looks like. One of them being, for example, oh, you know what, I have this application, this single application I have, and I want it to run on multiple clouds. For different reasons, one might be that if one cloud provider completely blacks out, that the other one can take on and continue running the application. Others are to avoid lock-in, for example, or to have alternatives to switch to eventually. But I see in the long run this strategy as quite difficult to implement, because you suddenly stop taking advantages of all the particularities or the features that are a differentiator between one cloud provider and the other one, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
would you see this strategy including on-premises clouds as well, then, you think?
Yeah, so that's also something that for sure will happen is, and we saw that trend starting already, is the integration of a cloud provider with on-premise solutions. And more cloud providers, all the main ones, basically treat on-premise as another cloud provider. So their multi-cloud offerings, they allow you to integrate your on-premise solutions as if they were provided by somebody else.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe something to add. So that we talked about one strategy, right? So this strategy of I have one application, I want to run it on multiple clouds. That's one way to go. What I think will be much more pervasive going forward, especially for larger companies, is that they will use different cloud providers for different purposes or different use cases. So depending on where you want to go or what team, for example, maintains or develops a given application, then they might be able to choose, I want to go with, for example, AWS, whereas another team of the same company working on a different application might want to use Azure. It might be also dictated by technological choices. For example, the application stack they're using.
So less risk management and more functionality based.
Yeah. So basically not imposing a choice from the top, but giving the choice to the actual teams working with the technology to go with one vendor or another. Indirectly, this will also reduce risks, right? Because you're not putting all the eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But still allows the team to move fast because they can choose what to use and then fully use it without having to worry about lock-in and about making it compatible with other vendors that they might never use, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And when we're talking about strategy, do you see a difference between the cloud strategy of companies going back, say, 5 years compared to today when they come to you for help? And what do you think will be important for companies looking for help migrating to the cloud during 2022? What is next year likely to bring that will make it easier for enterprise level companies to migrate into the cloud?
It's a really interesting question, because if I look back 5 years, which is like centuries in computer science or in cloud computing, especially
when too often with COVID, yes.
Yeah, especially that. And you asked me about the strategy that those companies had. I would say that lots of companies were still looking for the why. Like, why would they move to the cloud? So on one hand, our main job was convincing them that was the right choice. And today they come to us that they already partially adopted the cloud, or they're fully committed to do that. And they're more looking for help on the how to do that, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's a huge difference, because you spent time into convincing somebody that didn't want to use what you sold them because of a plethora of reasons, and now we're really into the how, into like selling our work and showing them what ways there are to achieve their objectives. So
So you find most of them understand the basic concepts behind the cloud today when
exactly, and the economics and what the risks are, what the advantages are, and so on. So, and I think that's especially maybe linking back to the previous question, why it should accelerate. So one of the things that allows now to more easily sell the cloud is that there is a proven track record of companies that did the migration, did the move to the cloud, and other companies now can base their decisions on the result of those experiences. So it will accelerate, because the more companies try that, the more companies will have confidence to be able to do that move, right? So that's looking at the past. Looking at the future, or in the more recent past, we had an explosion of everything container related.
Yeah.
And especially with the advent of Kubernetes and all the managed Kubernetes services, I see that as a trend which will continue, not only in 2022 but going forward as well. So we are seeing also a lot of standardization of those tooling, a lot of interfaces being defined very well, which allows you to run your different payloads unmodified on-premise. You can move them to the cloud. You can run them in specific orchestrators provided by the cloud vendor. I think about, for example, Fargate from AWS, but you can also choose to run them in containers on your Kubernetes cluster. Could still be a managed Kubernetes cluster by the cloud provider, or it could be your own. So this is surely something that will continue in that sense, and that will make cloud adoption grow. However, there is still a hurdle in that, is that we still have a lot of legacy applications that are not currently able to run in containers.
Yeah.
So this is something that also our customers themselves cannot even solve. Like, they have vendors that provide softwares to them, and it will take time until that move is complete. So I can see that continue for 5 to 10 years probably. Then we will have the long tail that I don't even consider, but yeah, so 5 to 10 years, I would say, for most of the main mainly used software to be really cloud native and ready to be deployed to the cloud.
And a lot of that will be companies trying to move the legacy stuff onto sort of microservice-based solutions instead, or anything that can be containerized, basically.
Yeah. But if you think, if you look back and you look at banks, for example, that still have COBOL softwares on their mainframes, nothing will actually point us that will be migrated to the cloud or to a cloud native architecture. Now the question is, will they be first migrated to a more classical approach and then to containers, or will they skip completely directly to containers? That's an open question.
It'll be interesting to see. Okay. Moving on a little bit, let's talk about platform as a service. The adoption of PaaS has continued to grow throughout 2021. At the end of 2019, Gartner predicted that 90% of enterprises that purchased public cloud infrastructure as a service would do so from an integrated infrastructure as a service and PaaS by 2022. Do you think this was an accurate prediction? And what should companies be thinking of when they are considering a PaaS solution in 2022?
I think it depends a lot on the definitions here. Also the numbers, like I cannot talk about if 90% is now the exact number. It also depends on who you count or what you count as a platform as a service. But definitely as cloud adoption grows, platform as a service adoption will also grow. Speaking about definitions, I would define Kubernetes as a platform as a service.
Okay.
So if we look back at the previous answer and seeing the growth of Kubernetes, then yes, the adoption of platform as a services will also grow in that sense. So from a purely logical standpoint, yes, it makes sense, and yes, it should grow. What should company think about when considering a PaaS? And that's something that we struggle a bit, or that I see the industry struggling a bit, is if you really want to take advantage of a platform as a service, you shouldn't be running your own platform as a service, right? Depending on your size, obviously, at some point it makes sense again. But if you put all your energy into actually managing the platform, then you're not really wielding the advantages of the platform itself.
You're not got the time to develop the product.
Yeah, exactly. So we saw, for example, we have those managed services that or managed Kubernetes. That's a good example from AWS, and you should be taking advantage of those. Like if you really want to use Kubernetes, in my opinion, my point of view, Kubernetes is more a platform to build platforms. So using Kubernetes without an abstraction layer on top is, in my opinion, not the right way to go. But what we see is a higher request for Kubernetes for sure, which and that's interesting. We actually had to put it on our roadmap for next year. At Divio, we are not using Kubernetes to orchestrate our customers' containers. The main reason is that we started out doing that before Kubernetes was a thing. So we didn't start out with Kubernetes. And from a purely technical or user impact perspective, it never made sense to invest the amount of time to go that route, because the return of investment was delayed a lot, because we couldn't take advantage of additional features as soon as we would implement Kubernetes. But the interesting thing is that the engineering team always pushed for Kubernetes, because from a technical perspective, it makes sense. You have this huge ecosystem of integration. You have a lot of standardization coming in, interoperability with other services, and so on. So we've always pushed a lot of that. But 2021 was the year where the sales team came back to us asking for Kubernetes. And that's an interesting change in perspective, right? So yes, now we finally have agreed that we want to do it from all sides. So the idea is that that this year we'll start the migration of our middleware to Kubernetes. And that's a bit what they mean with it's a platform to build platforms. Like we are in the business of building platforms. So we would like to adopt that and then offer many more interoperability points with our customers so that they might also be able to plug in their own components. If they have, for example, an observability platform they would like to use, which works with Prometheus or with other cloud native technologies, that we can expose those interfaces.
I guess it's a lot easier for us to standardize and customers to know what they're hooking into if we're using Kubernetes.
And to explain what we do, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. Let's talk a little about security and compliance. Considering a lot of the strict, often legal or compliance-based requirements that large enterprise companies usually have, especially within sectors like you've already mentioned, banking, telco, governmental organizations, what trends could we expect to see within cloud security in 2022?
That's also a good question. It ties back a bit to what I said before about the proven track, right? So if once you see other companies do the jump or take the step and prove that something is possible, that also is also true for security and compliance aspects, because sometimes you have requirements that might be satisfied also on a cloud environment, but you are not sure. And if you're not big enough, who are you to actually prove that it is, right? So eventually you need to wait until you get this experience from somebody else, or that eventually that experience then translates back into updated standards and regulations that take into account also what the cloud landscape can offer. So from my perspective, there will be an increased specialization of the certification and regulatory bodies towards cloud features and cloud platforms. We see, for example, there is ISO 27017, which provides guidance for cloud service providers and cloud service consumers about how to implement information security on, again, cloud specific. But from my experience, that's not highly requested right now. So the standard is there since 2015. It's also true it cannot be accredited. So you cannot get certified ISO 27017. But I would expect that's something that in the future conversation will come up more and more as those standards become more solid, more used, and more diffused in the industry, that we will ask for more cloud-specific requirements instead of being generic information security requirements.
Okay.
And the same is probably true also about expertise, like the people you hire, the software you use, and so on. I mentioned Kubernetes a lot, so let's mention it here as well. The fact of standardizing all those interfaces between the application payload, so what you run to be able to run your application, and the underlying system is able to host it, also defines this artifact format. So we see the Open Container Initiative, for example, specifying the Docker images, how they should look like, etc. And this allows us as an industry to build a lot of standardized tools around security as well.
Yeah.
So this will also continue for sure, that we will have this tooling, which before were quite specific for individual technologies, to be more generic. So instead of having to manage a tool for Java stuff and a tool for Python things and so on, you're now able to have a single source of truth, which is able to cover your landscape and do that. So there are more and more evolutions and progress in this sense. Let's think about container security, like runtime security. We were used to antiviruses, right, on running them on virtual machines. It doesn't make sense that much to run them in containers.
Yeah.
So, but there are now other threats that we need to monitor because we shifted to this other paradigm. So yes, there will be an evolution of tooling for sure. I would say a standardization and a centralization of like security information going forward. And I'm really looking forward to that, because the added value will be, if implemented correctly, will yield quite good security results for the industry as a whole.
It feels like this is stretching a lot longer than 2022 as well. This is going next few years.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But we also see more and more cloud providers integrating those offerings and back into the services. So it will depend. But yeah, nothing will be quick and easy as we would like to. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about complexity and cost management, because I think that's something that interests a lot of people. The sheer number of services available from the hyperscaler companies, Amazon and Microsoft and Google, is just continuing to grow rapidly. So the complexity of solutions and offerings is also increasing. So this can make cost management rather difficult, and a lot of organizations in 2021 have struggled to understand and keep control of cloud costs as they continue to increase. Most companies would prefer predictable costs, of course, under a longer period. So do you see any progress in the near future in tools available to help manage this complexity and help stabilize costs for companies in the cloud?
Well, a short answer or an honest one. I don't, frankly. There are a couple of reasons for that. One you mentioned, is the complexity is increasing.
Yeah.
So logically, also the pricing landscape is probably increasing. The other thing is that pricing is controlled by the cloud vendors, and they actually like to have it a bit more opaque because it's harder to predict and to control costs, as you said, and so spend more with them. So what I see is that some specialized services will be launched to manage that, right? There already are. We're using ourselves a couple of them. So going forward, we might see some competition coming in on that ground. Yeah. What I think is important, though, is to have control or to be able to stabilize or to analyze your spending. The most important factor is visibility into that spending, right? And the problem, and that the old cloud strategy needs to take that into account, because you have multiple teams, multiple applications deployed to the same vendor and so on. And what you get at the end of the month, if you don't do it correctly, is a single bill, which might be itemized by service type and by usage and so on. But you need to split that then again out on the individual applications that you were maintaining. And if you didn't think about that since the beginning, when setting up your cloud infrastructure and your cloud environment, then that task might be quite hard.
Yeah, difficult to pick apart who's using what and
exactly. Yeah. So there are ways to work around that, but the bottom line for me is observability and being able then to reconduct individual costs to payloads and to workloads that generated them.
Okay. Thank you. I think that was it for the moment, unless there's anything else you'd like to add just before we go to a Q&A. See if anyone's got any questions.
No? That would be good from my side.
Let's have a look, see if we've got any questions here. One, take the simple one here first. Will the recording be shared with attendees afterwards? Yes, it will be getting uploaded to the Divio YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it again there if you want later on. No problem. I'm not sure when that will be, in a few days probably. So another one here. You mentioned legacy systems earlier. Do you foresee any developments in offerings aimed at moving legacy into the cloud and supporting them in a cloud environment, or anything that could help dealing with legacy monoliths on older technology stacks?
Interesting question. There will surely not be a one-size-fits-all approach to that. And if that would be the case, then we would probably not have mainframes lying in basements of banks anymore, right? So,
well, I have seen mainframe as a service mentioned, so I don't know what. Yeah.
Let's see how flexible that is. But there is surely a movement in that sense. I think I talked about that before. The approach of the hyperscalers towards multi-cloud strategy is to look at on-premise as a different cloud vendor as well. And if we think about the current services, multi-cloud services like Azure Arc, Google Anthos, they already support on integration with on-premise. Yeah. AWS pushes that even further with their Outpost service. So you can actually order a rack from AWS and they deliver it to you. You can put it in your data center and integrate it with your services, and then use the AWS console to actually launch EC2 instances, for example, on-premise in your basement. So I would say that that's the starting point for that. Yeah. On the more like software front, we should look at ways to migrate, approaches to migrate workloads to the cloud, and also having the cloud have the feature needed then to support those legacy systems. Yeah. In my point of view, I would say 90% of the things, if you want to do a lift and shift approach, is possible. But the question is, will that yield a return of investment on doing that? Because probably if you just lift and shift, it might even be that the cloud is more expensive that you're already invested on-premise setup, right?
Feels like it's likely to be the tail end of a lot of people's cloud migration strategy rather than at the forefront. So,
but eventually it would make sense. Like if that's your last application running in your basement, you just move that over, spend some couple $100 more, and run it in the cloud and get rid of everything else.
Yeah, great, thank you. Don't see any more questions, so I think that's it. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This was our last Coffee in the Cloud for 2021. We do have a few more sessions planned for 2022, but no fixed date yet. So do stay tuned and keep an eye on Twitter or our website. We will be announcing them there. If you want to get in touch with us, or you have any other questions about today's webinar, do feel free to ping us on Twitter, either at Divio or with hashtag Coffee in the Cloud. We'll do our best to answer for you, or just get in touch with us at the email on the slide here. For anything a bit more complicated, or if you're interested in the services. Thank you, everybody, and Merry Christmas. See you next year.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.